Welcome to the Gnostic Chats, the podcast where we explore the depths of consciousness and the mystery of the mind. In this channel, we'll delve into the fascinating realms and blend wisdom from ancient times to modern insight to uncover the secret of human consciousness. From understanding the power of mind to exploring holistic approaches to health, join us on a journey to self-discovery and enlightenment. Ready to expand your awareness and nourish your soul as we embark on an odyssey of wisdom and transformative conversations. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, James, for being here, of course.
Oh, yeah. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So welcome back to another chat. Today we have James True. We are going to discuss some of his fantastic works, 7 different books out there. He's a philosopher, although he doesn't call himself that. I believe he calls himself a sophist. And he's a software engineer. He's developed things for a few different companies out there, which we could probably dive into in a little bit. But it's quite a repertoire of things, an artist and a philosopher of mind. And now he's working with the computers. But what I wanted to bring you on to talk about mainly was just like your illustrious career and this latest book that you brought out here, the Black Eye Club, which I went through a second time just to make sure I had some of the stuff down. These characters in the book, I wanted to ask you about where do you get some of your inspiration for some of these characters. It almost sounds like it could be maybe personal things that you maybe bring in. It just sounded like in the book it was a lot of your ideas of how you see the world, and I'm not sure if that's what you were going for with that. Was that part of the directive when you were writing?
Yeah. The Black Eye Club is only my second sci-fi novel, and the other 5 books, although they certainly have a lot of short story and narrative in them, none of them have been constructed in a start to finish way. Typically, it's been each chapter has been a new idea that I've explored, which I like that format. And I found it challenging to be able to hold a note the entire length of the book where the character has a motivation and that unfolds. And even as it being a form of philosophical exposition, there's the concept of the dialogues, which is a way of delivering of philosophical ideas through the conversations with, Hamlet and Horatio, or, Socrates and Plato and whatnot. And so it seeing the tool of writing as an ability to have a philosophical dialogue is definitely a new trick to me that I'm really, really into a lot. So yeah, I hope that it fluidly catches. My big concern is that people feel that maybe because it's a fiction, that would somehow take away from those ideas. But that now we're getting in the quagmire of what is reality anyway, and what I even consider to be true. So yeah, it's been a journey for me as an artist to switch from philosophical inquiry into just out and out just science fiction, but still maintaining the same kind of notes.
Right. Yeah, I thought the book was like educational, even although you were into the science fiction, there was still a lot of stuff you could go and check on for, like, to see that what you were saying was actually researched, so I thought it was very cool, the interplay between the characters. Like I said, yeah, Lita, her character was awesome. Buddy, Rose, I mean, yeah. So these characters, do any of them have relevance or reference from people directly in your life that you've tried to add into your books, or is it just all off the top, just a creative process?
Well, it's it's definitely both. And I think the clearest direction is to say is that anything I intentionally try and do usually doesn't work out so well. And that along the way of trying to intentionally do something, a lot of other things come out instead. And if I just learn to be comfortable as I hold my brush, then I don't have to stick to honoring the exact nature of the character versus honoring the exact nature of something that maybe even I've been through before, but could be framed from a different perspective. So I think that it's hard for me to write at all about anything that doesn't have some sort of human moment that I'm going back to. But then the loyalty to the characters, the names, the stance even is more dictated by the art itself of writing. And so there's certain words, for example, as a live streamer, I can say certain words because there's a visual thing. But if I'm writing a word to you, because I don't say it, you hear it in your mind, certain words are not going to work as well. Certain textures are going to be better expressed. So a lot of my writing, I don't really describe the characters so much. I want you to hallucinate that, but I have to put in the things that require the character to feel valid to me. And so I end up having to do a lot of writing that I don't want to do, but I think is necessary to really show you, the reader, hopefully, why this is a very human decision, that they're making and things. And then, like with any art, if you keep playing with the palette enough, the color, you were going for a mustardy kind of a tone, but it turns out the marmalades is just so much more where you needed to be, and you didn't really know that. So I think that part of the thing that makes you an artist is your ability to let that authentically adapt you without feeling guilt. Like there's nothing wrong with guilt, but it's like, if you don't feel confident as the art is changing you, then you may not end up with marmalade. The mustard may turn into a brownish sort of pea soup that isn't you, but because you didn't have faith in the process, you weren't able to find the marmalade tone, if that makes sense. So
It
it's a
does, yeah.
delicate balance.
Yeah. I was just thinking how usually like the best autobiographies are the ones where they're the truest to themselves and getting that right color, right? Finding
Mm.
finding their true color in their writing. And so this idea in the book, the way we see, I know this is big for you, and it was one thing that I really wanted to get on to the topic of the melanin and all these different points that you bring into this idea of how we render reality, how it's a hallucination. Basically, I like to think of it as creative play at the highest level,
Mhm.
because it's just a we're all just using these icons that we see in our interface, and then we render into that reality that we all can muster up the courage to walk into. And so this idea of the relay, can you go through some of how you see we're hallucinating the reality?
Um, I think your ability to understand how much you hallucinate reality is directly proportional to your ability to be comfortable with the fact that you are hallucinating reality. And so I'm answering the question by saying I don't think that I am capable of even fathoming just how deeply I hallucinate my reality, and I've written a book about it. I think it's about us taking enough confidence in ourselves to be able to submerge down into the depth of the hallucination and to go as deep as we can and not forget who we are. This really seems to be more the limitations we have with how much we're hallucinating. So to answer your question, I think it's more profound than we think. And I think um, at a very fundamental zygote level, if you look at some of the work that we've discussed, some of it's in the book, of the simplistic architecture of a skin cell already has the pure immanence of consciousness inside of it, and that its ability to hallucinate the world is already at play on a singular cellular level. It's a way of probing our environment. The closest thing we could say to it is kind of a sonar, but on a five-dimensional, like emotional kind of a thing. Sorry, this is my reminder to to have
Get
for us.
on, yeah.
And so the hallucination has to take place, I think, even from the very first zygote cell that we we start as at an early creation. So we build our cosmology before we have grown eyes. So it would be quite appropriate, in my opinion, that the entire cosmos that we see it is really pure hallucination. What we see is simply the quantum workings that really provide the most efficient ability to navigate through a terrain that we're otherwise blind to. But we get cues from the people that we're born into. You know, I was born into my mother's cosmology, like she gave me this entire world, and slowly like an epidermis, she's becoming smaller and I'm becoming larger, and they never really leave. So even my core reality is based on someone, not just my mother but my grandmother, who's I've never met, and I have no idea how much she was hallucinating too. And that the epigenetically I would have to be taught through the cerebrum, like the very back of our brain down here is actually gonna say, your grandmother says to think about this like a tree, and it's going to have the shape. I don't mean the lexical language, although that's a part of it, but just more of the way that we approach a tree is to consider that this is the thing we call the tree. This is the stuff we call the soil. This is the stuff we call the air. These are the things we call the acorns. And even that is a pretty massive hallucination if you really think about it. Even scientifically, you know,
Right.
I can show you that really is. If you break down what's actually happening with the cells, there's no clear like border that says, hey, this is the edge of the acorn. You've now entered into the evaporated essence of what used to be acorn, mixing with the evaporated essence of the tannins that are just outside the outer ecosphere of that acorn, which then get to the atmosphere. And even, you know, we've binaried that process a lot, and we're just not really able to stop doing that, I think, or at least easily be able to stop doing that.
Right. Yeah, it's very interesting. Like the space of where something begins and ends, like even like a cup. It's you've got an empty space where you can fill a cup up with water, but the water's never really entering that cup. It's just filling a space you've provided. So yeah, that is a very interesting idea. Trying to think where you had said something and I totally misplaced it. But
Well,
oh yeah,
we do tend to think that these are trivial matters, and the only reason why they're trivial is because they've just been so ingrained for generations by our forefathers that we're mistake trivial for uh 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 consistency.
right.
Right.
Right. The thing you said that I'm remembering now was the how your grandmother and such, the memory being passed on from generations. And are you familiar with the fact that like women, their ovum, they get what they get inside of the womb, so their eggs are developed within their mother, so your egg is developed within, you know, your grandmother, and this lineage goes back in that sense. And so it's crazy how, like you said, the cells, they have their own memory, they have their own little conscious being of wanting to be the best little cell they can be, or whatever they've been told that they are. And so it's very interesting to think this idea of like how you brought up Thoth before, and your first thought was what got you going. That zygote had a memory or a thought that it needed to do, and it plays it out as been told or directed. And yeah, no, it's an amazing thought, and that's what made me think of the epigenetics of the lineage of the mother, the grandmother, and it's just an infinitum there.
Yeah, the two things on that. The mitochondrial DNA ancestry really does take us back to a conceptual mitochondrial Eve and a mitochondrial Adam, even that the same XY has been able to pass on through the same, and it's purely more. I mean, I don't mind us calling it destiny, but I'm saying that if we were to create our own XY community, that we would naturally find over time, just through survival mechanisms, that a certain mitochondrial strain existed and never died. while all the others changed and mutated. So in a way, death really is more about remembering that the epigenetical Eve is simply the oldest memory that you have. And because we understand life the way we do, we don't fully look at the mitochondrial Eve as being a living entity, because at no point has the mitochondrial Eve ever been alive. She's just been a collection of the mitochondrial DNA. I don't mean to keep saying mitochondrial. It's just that there's nucleic DNA
Mhm.
and there's mitochondrial DNA.
Yeah, it's a
And
big
so,
difference.
yeah, and so both of us have these different versions of ancestors, but when you take them back, not only do we have our grandmother's grandmother's grandmother, we also have this mitochondrial Eve who's also speaking out to us. And so it really does become necessary to look back at Thoth and consider that the first time your zygote's able to pull water from the outside, it's able to find potassium or sodium inside that water and use it to store memory, limbic fingerprints. It's not even really memory. It's a limbic fingerprint of something that happened to you before. And we have no way in science, even now, of looking at the engrams in your brain and unvolving them and said, oh, this is where you learned this specific thing. It's more about we see the shadow of learning. We don't see the shape that was actually there. So I would argue that the fact that all moments in time are built on memory really does take the entire empirical system that we've been clinging to and make it completely invalid, because we actually hold no empirical way of even checking ourselves to see, is what I'm hallucinating that I remembered actually what I remembered? And the answer is clearly no. It's clearly no. And it's an assumption we make. And that assumption has built a great big world. And that great big world has giant cracks and holes, and it's falling apart because those Legos are not necessarily getting us where our creative playground needs us to go. And so we need to come up with a different kind of block, a different
Mhm.
kind of quantum Lego, so to speak.
Right.
And I think that's what this belief stuff is, this hallucination, belief, lying, placebo, healing powers. All of these things are instead of healing powers, we need to call unhealing powers, is a whole other realm of science, right? And that all those things are the exact same thing. It's the ability to put out not just like a song, like a oh, but an emotional oh, and that emotional oh, it can be so potent that it would heal you or destroy you. We have that in our language all the time, but because we haven't fully tapped into this essence yet, we tend to get lost in the actual letters or the sounds themselves. So we're getting there,
Right.
but most of it's an illusion of the illusion itself. So we've created our own hallucination of the fact that we're hallucinating to bring us back to this steady state that we're not hallucinating. And guys, we're totally hallucinating, that we're not hallucinating about the fact that we're fucking hallucinating. And if you look at that, that's just three. And so think about that, if our grandmother was doing that, then we are hallucinating that we're not hallucinating, that we're hallucinating, that we're not hallucinating, that we're hallucinating, that we're not hallucinating. And it's, you get it.
It's a fantastic
It's
oscillation. It's
yeah, it
it's like
is.
it's like ancient PTSD, right? Like it's it's a form of PTSD that we all are trying to cope with. And
It's a motor. Yeah, I love it. It's the Pistons, PTSD,
PTSD.
and your cell is constantly saying, and it says it. It literally says, I am, I am, I am, I am, because the RNA transcription is happening so fast. And so the process of writing who the cell is the process of recording a record of it, which is why Thoth is such a powerful archetype. That it's so amazing that we have this creature in our mind the whole time, but this is the exact process, the RNA process. is the ibis going bop, 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 bop. And anytime it feels angst, it may be more apt to miss. And if it misses, it gets to miss in a positive or a negative way. It gets to miss in a, oh, I missed that part, but I'm sure it was something shitty about how awful the world is. That would be one way of thoughtting the hallucination. The other way would be, oh, I missed that part, but I'm sure it was something about how amazing and beautiful this place is. And so the fill-in, the fill-in is our placebo. It is our ability to hallucinate. And that fill-in seems to come from a different vibe that we emanate from our nucleus. So the mitochondria would be the world talking to the nucleus, and the nucleus would be the nucleus talking to the world. So inside of each cell, you have two different associated personalities. One is if I'm the white piece on the chessboard, and the other is if, well, I'm the black piece on the chessboard. So the nucleus versus the mitochondria is the drama that we have to make I love what you're saying, this trauma motor is that juxtaposition, which I think allows us to create the menagerie. And that menagerie creates the focus. The focus is the witness is the sheen or the melon of consciousness. And we recognize that as being alive, even when it's a tiny skin cell that's been decoupled from the rest of itself. You're looking at an entity that has goals, it has motivation, and all of those things are just a fractal of I am. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense, really.
Right. The placebo, there's a book Joe Dispenza wrote called You Are the Placebo. It's pretty good. And then this idea that you're expressing is totally throughout the book itself, but it's amazing, this power of belief, your book, the technology of belief. Can we breach some of this? Like what was your main reasoning to get this book out to the world?
So the technology of belief is not just explaining what placebo is, but showing how it's actually placed into gear and given torque. And it's illustrated through all of these different stories that some are true, some are mythology. Most of them, almost all of them, are simply just pointed back at this power of torque. And if you have a certain eminence to get something done, you can warp space and time to accomplish that. Let's say, for example, that you wanted to end someone's life. I'm saying this because this happens all the time in crime. You're watching the pure raw magic of torque. I'm so angry at you, says someone, that they take a gun and shoot the other person. The torque of that belief is so strong that they're able to warp time and space around them because of how strongly they believe that their life depends on them shooting this gun in a certain vector at a certain point. And that belief has such potency that it ends up killing an entire universe of this other person. And in order for you to kill that other universe, you would have to take your torque and send it into that universe and convince all of the cells inside that universe that its life was over and that there was nothing it could do to save itself. As if gravity itself that was holding that universe together had ceased to exist. So you'd need some type of powerful magic that would invoke such a stringent, powerful injection through a silvery, metallical objects tend to hold torque more. And so the book is trying to just show you the essence and the science of how this works, of why death works, of why murder actually happens, but more importantly, why the placebo of healing does too. And so we have to have a less than sunshine approach to placebo. We have to look at it in a more gritty way as a kind of line. And it's not a free energy device. That in order for me to end your life in this example, I am ending my life too. The identity of who I was has stopped. I am now a fugitive because my own body is rejecting me because of what I did to another member, right? So my universe collapses upon itself, and my freedom, my autonomy, my ability to gather resources, all the trust that I find in my universe is gone, and I hallucinate that transaction, and it looks like the law. It looks like the wanted poster. It looks like a parole hearing. It looks like a court. All those things are just the amino acid chains that are changing place in my evocation of my universe requires that this guy dies so that I can proliferate. And so that transaction happens. Same thing when a mother lifts up a fucking Buick to pull it off of her baby when there's a fire. The adrenaline is ripping every single muscle, convincing it that it holds a vector to do more than anything else has ever been done. And she does it. But she probably loses 4 years of her life. That the universe doesn't reject her for that, but her adrenals pulled so much torque through that circuit that the filament gets burned more. So she ends up with a kind of a what we would call PTSD is really more about the knocks in our engine. It's not that killing, this sounds so evil, I'm sorry, but it's not that killing someone gives you PTSD. It's that the guilt and shame of the transaction that's wrapped around you killing someone has PTSD. Because there's a way on a quickening samurai moonlight night between two consenting adults where you could take someone's life with a sword and go home and fuck and eat a good meal and feel great for the rest of your life, right? So it's showing you the truth of what the real stuff is. The real stuff is this torque. The real stuff is this belief. It's a technology of belief, which is why I named the book that, because if we reject that it's a free energy device, if we embrace the fact that it's lying, we can really start to get our hands dirty and greasy and take a look at how this stuff works. And so the book just tries to kind of stab at that in a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah, I like that the torque, if people are struggling with the idea of it, imagine you're on your way to get somewhere very important and you're just in the middle of traffic and you really need to get somewhere. Your torque is going to start kicking in and you're going to behave differently than you normally would. You might start yelling at things and people or cussing at people that you normally would never do, and that's torque taking over. That's
Yep.
that's the reptile stepping in, right? As you would say that would be the reptile, right?
It is, and it's a strategic move that we make. We choke ourselves because we know that we'll start to fight. We'll start to kick for air. It's no different than when you pull the bit of the horse. Are you kick the horse in the kidneys? I hate to say it, but I mean that's the idea. Is you move this thing with a compression and a release. And so we invoke our reptile more than we never admit it because we live in a society where we're not supposed to admit that. But we literally invoke our reptile every day. We do it to get something done. And so it becomes it's always been a very necessary engine that we have. And our neocortex will try and convince and tell our reptile the right story to invoke the right kinds of feelings that allow the reptile to do the dirty work that's necessary to get the job done. And then our mammal recovers from owning all of the actions that it did and trying to resolve those things because it's not itself. This is what I was talking about earlier. You are not it. I get that we think you're yourself and you have this body and that the rest of the world is not you, but the rest of the world is your mitochondria hallucinating and you is your nucleus hallucinating. And the two of you have to be the same. You two are completely wrapped up together. And when we can have that realization, our hallucination changes. We switch from objective reality and we become a living universe of self. There's no objective reality because we understand what reality really is. There's no shallow end. We've been hallucinating the shallow end the whole time. There's no bottom. We needed a bottom because frankly it freaks us the fuck out. And we're living in colonies where we've told ourselves, oh, we have a bottom over here and it's great. It's the greatest bottom ever. And that's not the case. And as some of us get too shamany, we go out too deep and we start to say, there's no fucking bottom. And we try and come back. And the reef says, dude, we do not like you telling us that there's no bottom. And so, you go out and you find another reef that has just a deeper bottom. And so even this is just, if you break it down to a singular cellular skin cell, this is the skin cell saying, hey, I'm gonna try and go over here. Can I survive over here? Can I live over here? And it'll couple with or decouple with its environment as necessary, as long as its hallucination feels engaged. It seems like consciousness really is just an engagement. When we check out, when we become bored, we actually have the ability to die. I don't think we fully embrace that. You see this sometimes in hospice, though, that there's a willing state of surrender. And that happens at accident scenes, but more importantly, it happens in addiction. It happens in an argument. It happens in a relationship. It happens in a journey. It happens if you're trying to do something and you realize halfway through, this isn't even who I am. I don't even want this. And then you're like, but I don't want to lose all those calories. And you're like, but it's not who I am. Even that, all these things are just showing you this texture of torque, this terrain of torque it's not tangible, right? It's like a pixel or a voxel that's imbued with meaning or it's not imbued with meaning. It's so it seems like life is more like that. It's like a hollow deck of meanings, and where we stand gives us a certain meaning. And so vibe is the alchemy of space. If you really consider what space is, our ability to move about this planet is our ability to alchemize a vibe from a different voxel, from a different pixel space, and just feel that. And this is the closest as we can get to rendering God, because we would have to imagine that every voxel is hallucinating in the same liquid. And it's just, the resolution is so profound that we can't even fathom that, which is why I'm saying there's no bottom. There's no bottom because we cannot fathom that far,
Haven't created it yet. Haven't used our imagination. We haven't pretended it, right? We haven't
So I think we
given it.
pretend it. I think we do pretend it, but we haven't found the canvas border. It doesn't seem to be an end to it. And I think that if we ever were to be able to find the end of it, we would be in trouble and we would stop growing, much like a fish would only grow within a certain space. So, this is why I think the Aztec had like a 52 years of consciousness, and then they just kind of reset themselves. And the pagans more had like a 7-day kind of consciousness where, their entire being was just 7 days. And then if it's fucking cold and then it's fucking warm, but it's 7 days. And you're just looking at this is the best you can hallucinate. So you're going to hallucinate a fish tank that has 7 days in it. And so we're at 365.4 point every 400 years, believe it or not, you have to change another 4 minutes. So even our leap year isn't even correct with every 4 years, that every 400 years you have to do something else. So I think that we're looking at the voxels growing with us. The resolution, I don't know if it's the sun or the crone, I don't know what the fuck it is, but it does seem that the resolution is self-filling, because if we go back to earlier forms of consciousness, it's just much more objective, it's much more static, it's much more simplistic, kind of a thing, but we're still seem to be living in the same mix. So it's like a fractal, that like a ripples, it seems to, this voxel state I'm talking about, it seems to each voxel can become a trillion voxels, simply by staring at it, simply by putting your attention into this pixel. That pixel could turn into 70 pixels. And then as soon as you let go, if enough people forget that pixels, the voxel shrinks and it goes back into nothing. I think a lot about this a lot. I never get to talk about it because it just sounds so fucking out there. But this is why I think we know things like Saturn. Like we Saturn is far enough away that everyone can see it. And it's hard enough to see where people have to look hard. So it's a certain kind of vibration that has a certain kind of a name that everyone can access from the same point, because in the voxel terrain, it's a space that connects all things. It's like a node. A node would be like on a computer node where different things would, like Saturn just happens to be a node that touches all other nodes, where other nodes are more like in neighborhoods. So James True is a neighborhood of a cul-de-sac of a neighborhood of a cul-de-sac of another node, but all those nodes are right off the node called Saturn. And it's inside this texture, this terrain of belief, right? Because if you're going to memorize the word Saturn, especially if you're going to do it for 200,000 years inside your cerebellum, then that would have to be a thoroughfare inside this other dimension that all of us seem to be touching.
Connected to.
Yeah. So Saturn is more real than you or me. But when we start to look at this belief terrain I'm talking about, this other kind of a place,
Yeah, it's like just thinking about, or the imagery made me think neural circuits in your brain, like they're all connected in a way. They even say there's like some type of magnetic rope that keeps all of the planets together or whatever. I'm not so sure any of that because I'm sitting here on this ground, but the idea there just made me think about, yeah, the interconnections between our gut to our brain. Everything's kind of got these little
Yeah.
circuits that run off of, am I okay or not? And then you have to like kind of, this circuit has to tell the other one or whatever have you that this one's doing this, or, and then you
Yeah.
collectively come together and make a decision.
So right now there's a James True constellation inside your brain, and those neurons fire when that name comes up, or when you think about me, you create planets that orbit around that constellation James True inside your brain. And the orbit is your focus. That's your just where your attention is. But the constellation is the real live mitochondrial pixels or voxels that you've laid space for. Because you and because everyone else has a constellation, I mean, not everyone else, but everyone else who knows me also has a constellation of James True, then we could look at that constellation and see what commonalities are there and pull that and use it as a map to the world. But I don't mean the commonalities of James True. I'm talking about the commonalities of each of our constellations, because the commonality inside neurologically of the constellation James True is going to be one of 7 neurological depths, like in the skin. Some memories are deeper, that's like on the 7th layer,
Yeah.
and some are real shallow. And we tend to, I don't think we truly know this, but we speculate that maybe the deeper memories seem to be more important, that we consider them more important, so we plant them. That's a speculation. We don't know if that's the case. But if we understand that the binary signal of James True is going to be a 7-bit depth across a certain neuron tree that maybe has, I'm just making this up, 126 branches. And so that 126 branches would be a depth of 1 to 7 for each branch. So I've just kind of given you an address, a constellational address of James True that would be, 76711 128 times, and that would show you what this constellation would look like. And that if anyone else was to experience James True, if we could start to compare our brain atlases together like this, I think we'd unlock this new terrain. I think we'd see what this new terrain looks like. Now, right now, we just unlocked one brain. Like we've just, and it took so many fucking supercomputers to do. It's called the Brain Atlas Project, and it's probably not done, but the systemic process or procedure for it's been done, and it's huge. It's way beyond our capability to even look at yet. But just the fact that we could even map it is really been quite a feat. We've been doing that with what we're calling the rabies virus, by the way. We've been doing that using this little algorithm. And that algorithm is so minute and precise that we're able to run it through the constellation trees and receive a result. It's like a bioluminescent, it's like radioactive, but it's like a bioluminescent marker. That marker can be seen from a certain trajectory. All the neurons appear and they show you the depth through the, anyway, all that to say, I think we're getting there because we're hallucinating the ability that we could understand our entire brain tree. It's such a intricately large thing that I don't think we've been able to hold the belief that we could understand that. Only now can we understand that. And we can't yet understand how could we compare two of those. Like that is just, oh fuck. but you can imagine through Moore's law or just through the progress of ripples that we may be able to do that maybe one day. And if we could, it would just simply show you, I think the universe would create this other epidermis that simply would have that depth. And then we would fill it with whatever crustaceans or deep sea anemones we needed to hallucinate that would show us source reality in a more comfortable first and accurate second way, because those seem to be the two things that drive our torque of belief most. It's not the truth. It's is it comfortable and does it work? That seems to be the priority that we use for truth finding across all fields, science, all of them. It seems to be, is this comfortable and does it kind of work? That's really all we require anyway. So we're not building a map of truth anyway. So you're muted.
It does seem, yeah, you're right. It does seem that way though, where truth is no longer in the room. It's more or less comfort. People are not looking for actual truth. They think that that's what they're after, but they're actually just looking to be comfortable in their space.
Yeah, and it's always been that way. I think that you and I, when we were young, we just hallucinated that the world wasn't that way. And then as we grew up, we noticed it, but a lot of people just haven't noticed it yet. So it's almost like a default belief that we have to have just so we're comfortable in the world, is that we think, well, yeah, everyone's out to find out the truth, and that's really what we're all about. And that makes us trust each other more. So
yep, it's better to have someone in the room that wants truth than to be deceived, to deceive you, I guess, right?
I don't know. I was thinking about this the other day because, like, we're taught to smile to each other because smiling is supposed to alleviate the concept that maybe this person is dangerous. But in the wild, to show your teeth to someone is to say, I'm a formidable opponent, and I feel threatened by you, and I'm going to stop your digestive process by sending a vibe that right now you need to be in sympathetic mode because this is fight, flight, danger. And so, but we're taught that we should smile at each other.
That's
And so,
interesting.
yeah, so I think that if we really unwrap that, really the smiling person is the one that is nervous because they understand the truth of the world. And so they kind of smile more because then we're like, I know a bunch of you are fucking psychopaths, and any of you are gonna. I think that really is what we're showing each other, and that's okay. By the way, I actually think that. So first of all, I don't think the world's broken, but second of all, I think that if you were to live in a world where people knew that it was the jungle, I think for the first couple of weeks it'd be like really hard. Like it'd be, oh my God, fuck it. But after a while, I think it'd get to be fun. I think we'd actually would enjoy that. If we actually knew that, no, your third grade teacher is probably lying to you, why do you think she might lie to you? And then for you at 8 years old, you're already starting to think about maybe because you had a bad day or because, that's going to get us so much farther if we could just, really, really be in touch with that. Because instead we tend to believe the opposite, that no one ever lies, and George Washington and, cut down the cherry tree, all that stuff. It's um yeah,
No, yeah,
but
definitely. I
that's
could
not comfortable for people. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. It's yeah, whenever you have the friend that coddles you, or the friend that tells you how it is, sometimes you don't even call that friend that will tell you how it is. And
Yeah.
based on you not wanting to know, you don't want the truth. You want somebody to make you feel good, not to make
Yeah.
you realize what you did was wrong or yada yada. So
Yeah.
it's definitely interesting how people tend to lean towards comfort over truth. Your
Yeah.
book on the Ark of Baphomet, it seems
Mm-hmm.
to be a book around centering around finding compassion for this world around you. Would you agree with that?
I think that really helps to, yeah. The more comfortable you are, the more parasympathetic you are. So your body enters into a state where it's like, hey, let's make saliva, let's urinate, let's eat, let's digest things. That this state is has a much you're dilated more to receive information that you might otherwise find tricky or hard to swallow. So anytime you're in learning mode, you need to be in parasympathetic mode. You need to really be into that state. So yeah, anytime you can find compassion for someone, you tend to is almost always the same as disarming them. It's not that someone is not dangerous. It's someone is only dangerous when you cannot predict their behavior. If you can predict someone's behavior, they're actually not dangerous. And so we equate danger a lot of times with the ability to cause harm. But the ability to cause harm is a very different construct that's under the branch of predictable versus non-predictable behavior, right? So a 4-year-old child could electrocute a 600-pound gorilla. It's very possible, and it would require very little effort for the 4-year-old to do that. This is really about the predictability of the behavior. And so if we want to see deeper into the world, we need to be more comfortable. And so if you look at compassionating as a kind of sonar where you're using it to probe the depth of why someone is behaving the way they are, then you relinquish their ability to be unpredictable. And in that case, they become less dangerous, which puts you into a parasympathetic state, which allows you to digest them more completely, which makes you safer, which ends up kind of regulating everyone around you to digest more and be a little bit less, on their guard. And that's how you pollinate or depollinate the world. So yeah, to me, genius, understanding, creativity, symbiosis, success, everything is tied to compassion. Every single thing is tied to compassion, your ability to empathize with someone in a deep, meaningful way, no matter how evil you think they are, no matter how nasty you think they are, for you to place yourself inside their wetsuit and be them becomes you first accept them, you see them as human, you like them, even you love their motivations, and now you're understanding why they're behaving that way. And you literally, all your opponents just turn to dust because they're not opponents anymore. They're people that have a motivation that's geared on a certain limbic history, And quite frankly, it makes sense to you now. And so they become uh, uh, disarmed simply because you know where their motivations are going to be, and you know whose neck they're going to try and cut cut next, based on where they're at right now.
Yeah, you expressed this idea of compassionating things without also giving consent. And I
Yes.
thought that that was a profound way of putting it for sure. Could you elaborate on that idea?
Yeah, it's because we were talking about earlier about how the resolution of the world changes. We become more high def. And before we became so high def back in the objective world, we thought that compassion and consent were the same. We thought that if you were to look at life from someone's perspective, you would have to agree with it and you would have to become that. But actually, you can just take plasma and like pull it from yourself. And now it's in this ball, and I can send it over to you. And when it gets into your frame, it's going to simulate what it would be like to live you, but I'm still over here. And that we didn't have the ability to discombobulate so effectively before. And that the more we compassionated someone, we tended to enter into a cult where we would follow them. And so earlier on, then to listen to someone would be, and a lot of people still fall for this, where they think if you hear the words of this person, then you will fall into a trance and you will slip into the cult. And it's a very, if you feel that way, you should definitely be afraid, because they're just showing you where your consciousness is and where it used to be. This is serfs, slaves. This is why I have my talk on slavery, because you're just looking at a consciousness that's just more pack mulish. And quite frankly, it's just wants to survive. They want to level up. And in order for them to level up, they're going to be a pack mule for a while. They're going to be a squire for a while. And then they're going to, one day, if they make it, great. They'll be a knight, or they'll realize, I don't want to be a fucking knight. I want to be a blacksmith or whatever. So it's respecting where we're at. This is part of compassioning, is to really look at someone and really, like, you think back to the stories of pharaohs who their slaves were thrown into the tombs with them. And certainly doesn't make me feel happy. But when I first heard that, I only looked at that from a very brutalish, kind of evil, egotistical, maniacal way. And I can still do that. I can. But also, I've compassionated what it's like to have the consciousness of a slave, and for them to feel that that was appropriate. Really gave me more opportunity to grow as an individual, simply by compassionating why people would agree with that. Because if people really disagree with it, I think it would happen maybe once or twice. But instead, it happens like over and over and over and over again, just like slavery happens over and over and over again. And only then can we really do the math and go, hey, wait a minute, let's back up and take a look at why this is happening. And then the compassion's there, and then the threat's gone, because you understand, what's going on.
What got them into that position or that place? They just
Yeah.
needed to get some shoes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's so much there to that, but also to all of our crimes, all of our trespassing, all of our ability to demonize other people is typically just us trying as best we can to be a saint, to really be a good person. But the only way we can really gain is we need to find more parasympathetic feelings. And I can do that if I can blame all my problems on this guy over here and say that he's all the issues. And then if people find solace in that, I feel like I'm helping those people. So by me setting this witch on fire, I'm making these people feel good. And by making them feel good, I'm growing more compassionate. But fuck, now I feel guilty for this, and I don't want to be more compassionate. So let me drink, and then I'll lower this. But then I want to do better because my kid's looking at me, and fuck, this world is so hard, right? And so it's all about, we have no choice. We're being led at gunpoint along the plank of compassion. We're going to have to find it anyway. And so yeah, I say, let's embrace it. I say, let's lean in. So
Yeah.
everyone that's causing me strife, I look at as an opportunity, right?
Right.
It's the only opportunity I'm going to see to know, why do I feel lesser? Why am I shrinking my world? We tend to, if someone, we feel unempowered by someone, really what's happening is we've hallucinated our world into a very small, and this is typically how we would pull up enough pressure to pull our reptile out, because we know if we bang on the cage of the reptile long enough, that fucker will come out and do what needs to be done. So most of this is tactical, but we don't want to ever admit that because we're always smiling. And to show your teeth means that you're polite, and to expose, and the whole time we're like, that doesn't mean polite at all. Like there's, raise your hand, creatures of the world. Who here thinks showing your teeth is like, none of them are going to do that. None of them. We're going to be like, why are you doing that? What, so.
Yeah, it's such an interesting idea there. I didn't even think about it. And it's funny because I found myself in positions where I was having to defend myself, younger, more testosterone filled me, and I would always end up smiling at the person I was about to start throwing hands at. And it's just crazy. I'd never even connected that before.
A lot of times, this is why I use the word hyena to describe a certain kind of consciousness, because they tend to laugh and smile and sarcasticate a lot, and to say things in a very, like they're pretending to be laughing at something, is the same way of kind of showing your teeth. It's a form of fear. And I've noticed that as I've grown older, I'm in my 50s now. So as I've grown older, I don't smile as much as I used to, because my confidence comes from a place in my body, one which is that, so you could think about, to smile would be, I'm disarming everyone because I'm showing everyone I'm afraid. Like there's a lot of complexity here to the smile, because you could think of it, well, wouldn't that make you stand at you would make everyone defensive? And yeah, you could see that too. It's going to depend on your size and your torque. But if you're a big guy and you're smiling, the obfuscation of those two things, the juxtaposition of those, actually makes it more of a cowardly sort of feeling. This is what makes us, we're all artists in the way that we emote our limbic feelings. And so I'm not saying that society is wrong because it's smiling. I think that society is showing us a really deep truth that we can understand much, much more. And the propensity to not need to smile in public, I personally think, is a kind of a guru kind of move, where I'm trying to level up just as master of myself, where if I should be able to be in the room and intimidate someone, I need to define that word, but just pause for a sec. I need to be able to intimidate someone freely. My ability to intimidate you is not necessarily a creative act caused by me. My ability to intimidate you is a dance you and I have to agree to do together. And this is that thing where I was telling you about we hallucinate what's us and what's not us. We really haven't touched into this world yet. And I've noticed that if I can be more comfortable with intimidating someone, and I don't mean I want to scare someone, but I get how someone's just not going to hear what I'm saying right now. But if people are on the right vibe, you're going to know what I mean. If I can feel comfortable being in the room with people that are intimidated by me, then really I'm just simply understand the honesty of what I am more. I'm a 6'1" stranger that has the musculature and the skeleton framework to end a person's life who's 4 feet tall. If you're 4 foot tall and you're inside my presence and you're intimidated by that, that's not a sign of flaw. That's a sign of truth. That's a sign of authentication. My comfort with how authentic I am should be my highest goal as a guru, because, and I'm talking about everyone's goal to level up here, because I want to parasympathetically compassionate every single soul in this room, and I have to be authentically comfortable to do it, which means I have to accept the fact that I'm not saying I'm intimidated, but I'm just making this up, that I'm a bald, badass motherfucker that's like, holy shit, what's that guy? I don't know how I'm perceived because it changes so often. And that's how my posture is, how my intonation is, how quickly and aggressively I react to things you've said. I'm trying to change it now because I most of the time I'm just authentically saying what I want to say. And so this becomes a calligraphy almost a meditation that I'm practicing inside of a temple, and I'm at the Family Dollar. I'm at the Family Dollar practicing my calligraphy in the temple as being as powerful as I can without feeling uncomfortable, right? So I intimidate and I feel good. I accept the fact that I am a redwood or a sequoia or whatever it is that you are feeling at the time that you think is happening. By accepting that, our society is going to say that's egotistical, that's fucked up, but really you're regulating everyone else in the room to accept more power, to hold more power. So there's a lot there. Sorry, James, but it's
Oh
just
yeah.
like this stuff that I think about that it isn't even necessarily right for everyone to think, if that makes sense, you know?
Right. Yeah, depending on your posture, like you say, it's all a matter of where you're at. The there's a idea of like all of it surrounds just the idea of death, like the denial of death is kind of where a lot of people find any of this type of stuff to be relevant at all. Like it's Ernest Becker did a book I think called Denial of Death, and it went through different stuff like how psychology, like a lot of the issues of like the PTSD that we talked about earlier, it's just like a form of denial of our mortality. And what do you think that do you think that has any relevance to the way we operate?
Um, I, I think death is a hard thing to even prove as anything else but just a gestalt, like a changing gestalt. Really what we do is we lose our ability to write to the record. And we would write to the record by what we memorize. And so at the time of death, we stop memorizing things. And so there really is no death. There's just opportunity and the loss or the end of that opportunity. And so we have an opportunity to write to the cells, not even while we're alive, but even after we die. And that the way we write to the structure of this world after we die is a very special kind of magic. And that magic would only be based on our ability to possess another creature with the essence of who we are. So I have two lives. I have the life that I can tangibly record every moment by recording it in my memories. And then I have this other life, this ether based life, where I can haunt and possess others through the algorithms of things that I've touched here, and that those things would occupy. This might sound very self-serving and whatever, but when we first started talking, you mentioned the name Lita and Buddy and Rose, which are characters in my book that I created in my mind, and I wrote them down and I put love into them. And when you said those names, it touched me. It made me feel very special inside, because there's a constellation that's in your brain, and it completely came from me. It didn't come from physicality, it came from me. And that to me means more than anything. And so I think a lot about death as more about your transition into this ghost writing, this how much when you were here, how much of the things that you said possessed those around you. There's a chance that this recording might be present after you and I die, and that this recording might be heard by someone, and that they're listening to a dead person talk to them right now and say this to them. And so this proves, if that was the case, it would be just another of many, many proofs. I already have them. I already have these proofs. I already know it works this way. So I'm writing in above the horizon and below the horizon. And quite frankly, the people that we learn about are people that have written below the horizon. They're dead people that we found out were important after they died. At no point in time while they were alive were people insisting how incredibly important this stuff is. Quite the opposite. It tends to be this guy sucks or he's blah, 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 or whatever. It's only after we die that we caramelize, and our writing really tends to change. So I think if you really want, if you see what I just said and that resonates, then it would tell you that death is the fear of missed opportunity. And so as long as you're taking every opportunity, you're going to die just fine. You're going to die just fine because every opportunity, you're like, what was I doing today? Did I have flow state today? Or was I trapped living in an illusion of someone else's ideal about what reality is? Right. As long as you have that, then death never comes. You never ever get to record that you died. Never fucking happens. You just keep saying, oh, I think I'm going to die. I think I'm going to die. And you forge enough torque into that belief, but eventually you never actually record that you died. So it never really happens.
So, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I wanted to maybe breach this it's self-taught, right? Software engineering. You've taught yourself this. The
Yeah.
um the relation to our DNA and coding. I've seen you make some connections there. Do you want to talk about any of that?
Yeah. So the nucleic DNA could be very akin to having an IP address on a network. And the importance of an IP address on a network really does give individuality to everything that didn't used to exist before. That before there, you could argue, I think this is actually how names came out, by the way, that individuals had to grow out of the bud of names. And before before we had the resolution to contemplate that each of us were individuals, there were like 12 modes of people. There was Mary, and you can look this up in the Bible. It's like it was like, yeah, hey Mary, and like 17 women turn around. It's like, no. Red haired Mary, yeah, you Mary, yeah, Kafuka Mary, come here, and then as we develop the resolution, people develop the idea to mutate into an individual. So individuals are kind of own species. It's like an etheric species is kind of a way of looking at this. And the only way that we could have this back to code is if we had a unique identifier. The ability to uniquely identify us on the network allows every other person to store information about that person. This is the constellation we were talking about earlier about James's 127 depths of 7. And so that resolution gives us the ability to have a conversation, a TCP IP connection is actually what it's called, with every other soul on the planet. And if you understand that would be required for the network to work, you've now just intrinsically shown yourself things that you did not know that you just showed yourself, because you just proved that if all of us on the network require a unique IP address to be conscious, then that means that the network has certain rules. It has certain characteristics to it. One of these characteristics is, look what happens when we have twins. That these people morph and live a bicameral life, but that life slowly veers off into difference as their own DNA changes its IP address over time. And this is what happens with twins. The identical twin can be born with most of their chain almost exactly the same, but those twins slowly change over time because their DNA is writing a different script. How's it writing a different script? Because Thoth is doing every transcription. It's missing a few beats and it's mutating either in the positive or the negative, but it's mutating. And that mutation is giving the world a new IP address to focus on. So I can remember 5-year-old Sarah very differently than I can remember just being born Sarah. Those are different IP addresses. So even our identity changes every second, which is really hard for us to wrap our heads around. But if you think about software being always constantly being upgraded, there's a new version. It's very similar to how the RNA would work. That it's just, look, man, things are different now. We got to fucking change, man. It's time to change, and this is cool.
Program.
Yeah, that kind of, and morally, because the resolution's higher, you're not going to make it if you think in this old way, if you think in this old kind of mode. So to me, it's all software, James. Like nothing makes more sense to me than watching how the software world unwrapped into this nature. And keep in mind, all the philosophers, the reason why I don't call myself philosopher is because I'm not a dead historian that thought before electronics was existed. Every single idea that we have about what a soul is, it's coming from ideas that predated radio. And so we've really had no concept of a wireless consciousness while we were constructing these ideas. So all of us are building our own cosmology. All of us are sophists now. We are peddling our own wisdom because we are hallucinating our own world. We're not philosophizing about a Platonic world that's hidden behind a veil that you can find if you go to academia. No, this is a world that you build from the ground up. And if your world says this is all pirates, fucking go for it. Let's see what your world paints, because it could be more accurate than my picture. And who am I to say that my world is the absolute hallucination? Because it's not, right? We know this because we're not able to predict our world perfectly. And the second you and I get better at predicting our world perfectly and extracting resources from it is the second that we can start to really formulate our own cosmology and develop our own system. But we're not there yet. And I think that's good. I think this is what makes life better. I think we'd be trapped in, it's like when I was in the military, it just was such a painful existence because nothing was predictable. I mean, everything was predictable. Every single thing was laid out. Everything was known. Everything was accounted for. There was no chance of mystery or missing or anything like that. And I was just dying. And I was epigenetically turning myself into something that would die faster while I was there because I didn't want that world to exist, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mystery, right? My story.
Yeah.
You were missing my story.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's why I wanted to bring it up, because I feel like the ideas that we were just expressing with genetic memory and all this other stuff, like if it's you got the source code, everything in there just seems to relate. It's just crazy how the comparison can be drawn out in almost
Yeah.
identical fashion.
Oh,
Uh,
it's in even Enoch, which is, I think, even the biggest clue is we have this mythological idea of, so Enoch was purposely taken before he died. He was like taken at a pure state and recorded and saved. Like he was like put onto a cloud drive when he was in his perfection, because they wanted a signature, a Enochian seed, a key that we could install in all of us as sort of like a tomato stake of here's where we want you to grow. This is where you'll head. And so it's giving our epigenetics as something to shoot for. And I think that's a really crucial part. It's almost like showing us which way's up. And so we're able to grow from that key. And each of us are trying to perfect the code. Each of us are writing our own version of what we think is the best code. And so if you look at this in a grand scheme, the software is perfect because we're watching a tensor algorithm unfold right now. We're watching a giant latent library of every possibility that can exist, and we're throwing pellets through it, and we're looking for the pellet that we like the most. And that pellet that we like the most will be, so there's the mitochondrial Eve and the mitochondrial atom, and that those will fulfill themselves at one point. And the fulfilling of that self would have to come through some state I don't understand, where we are unable to fathom things. This is what I would call a singularity. It's not really a made up term. It would, I mean, for me, I'm saying that it would just be a state at which consciousness stops being able to conscious itself more, because all of the totality of space itself has been understood or assimilated, as the Borg would say. And assimilated isn't necessarily kept in a cube. It's more about touchable and reachable. So every crystal in the air could be used in the algorithm to understand each other, and that would be the world simultaneously just compassionating itself. And that the moment that happened, it would seem like that would end it all. because the pixels themselves would never be able to paint any other color except for on, because we knew ourselves completely, and there's not a picture that we could show ourselves or hide from ourselves, because we've hallucinated the world so perfectly that it's impossible to find mystery anymore.
Yeah. The programs that you worked on, what were they in general? Was it one was for an autism group or something like that? Well, is it just basic like coding? Is that what you were doing, or
Yeah,
still?
a lot of what I did was visual coding, where I would have to present a story or something in some kind of visual way. And a
Yeah.
lot of those times it was at trade shows or augmented reality, things like that. Right now, I'm working on some code that is a timeliner, and it takes a series of dates and it lays them out spatially on a timeline, so you can kind of digest when things happened, but it
Mhm.
lays it out in a 3D space. So I'm using the Unity 3D engine to program that. So it's a lot of Objective-C code and things like that.
Yeah.
Most of my code has been more like Perl and spidering, where before Google was a thing, people would spider the web and like gather what they could find organically and bring that back, and then build a hallucination of what was on the internet. And then Google was just the one that had enough money to say, let's just download the entire internet.
Put it all
And
together.
yeah, when I was 13, I'm like, there's no way I could even fathom that. But the military industrial complex is like, yeah, we got plenty of, yeah, no problem. Yeah, yeah, we can do that. So, and that's what I mean by people are able to do things in the world that I could never fathom, because I could not even transmit the idea that someone would say, yeah, you can have as many hard drives as you need to do this. It's
Hmm.
not even a possibility at the time, you know.
Right. Yeah.
I think we're there right now. This constellation, the brain atlas thing I'm talking about, our ability to compassionate the past. You know, we're looking at these old videos and able to pull audio from those, you know, to even watch the stories, do facial recognition, track down the history of each of these people on the street, who knew each other and how. All those things would give us way more deeper information into the nature of reality, because we'd understand how consciousness, I think, has changed too, how that pack mule kind of consciousness, where it came from. And I think as we understand that more, I think I think we got a ways to go. There's still many final frontiers, but I do see that the singularity would be a point where we've just been able to process what those are faster, or out process those, because the environment itself is becoming our compassionating machine. And really, this is just God. We've just reached omniscience at this point. If we're able to turn the entire world into a limbic system that's able to sense the environment, that sounds like God to me. So, you know,
Yeah. Hard to separate it, especially when you're using the same words, right?
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting that we would have computers, because to me, computers is our belief in omniscience, omnipresence, uh, all of those, the four omnis of God, really are just come down to the perfect supercomputer. And so we're just approaching God is all. And computers would be, it's absolutely the perfect organic way through silicon, by the way, you know, something in the environment. It's such a perfect way of understanding that. And right now we're computing with silicon, but that's just one element, you know. We'll be able to compute with all these elements eventually. And when that's the case, then your supercomputer, it takes on a whole other realm of being. It's not even a computer. It's just a living plasma of all things. And who's to say that just hasn't been there all the way? We just don't want to hallucinate that all things are knowable right now. So we hallucinate that we don't know, simply because it's the only way we can digest stuff right now.
More
Right? That's just,
comfortable.
yeah, it's more comfortable right now. That seems to be more the case, I think. This is the
Yeah.
story of Kronos, by the way. Kronos cut the umbilical cord, the oldest mythology we have, and came crashing to the earth. And I think that probably is what the singularity is that
Mm.
you would know all things would be connected to the cord, all things would be wired into the snake. All the cords in your house are part of that mythology. And as those cords grow, the omniscience grows too. And eventually at the singularity, the person who is seated in that chair, the mercy seat, literally the mercy seat of that singularity, would probably go insane and want to end the entire, bring back mystery. Yeah. So
Mhm.
they would cut the cord and fall, and all things would be forgotten. And we would be living off the dying, stinky fog of a snake that used to know all things, which is the
Mhm.
Oracle of Delphi, which is the
Right.
Pythos. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just thinking that the first AI, the Oracle at Delphi.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's been a wonderful conversation, and I've
Yeah.
got some stuff to do for the rest, get my day put together. But I truly appreciate you being here, and I'm hoping maybe we can also have a another chat again. Maybe bring up some other topics we missed in this one, because obviously we missed a few of your books. Didn't even bring up like the quantum rapture and some of your earlier works. I'm sure you still are fond of some of those, even though maybe your views have
Mhm.
changed. But yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Oh, I sure did. Yeah, James. Thank you. I'd love to do this again anytime.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Enjoy your
Well,
day.
thank you, sir. And I'll see you soon over there at the airship or on your YouTube channel. Oh yeah, which is we should shout out the YouTube channel because you do a bunch of lives, more not a bunch, more little
Yeah,
less
yeah,
than
YouTube channel. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
You guys just look up James True, and yeah, you'll find my stuff there. And but yeah, this is the kind of stuff I like to do, is have conversations like this. So yeah, thanks a lot.
All right,
Enjoyed it.
thank you, James.